So if you don't manage that relationship throughout the term of the lease, you're going to almost guarantee that the tenant is going to be a little bit vengeful when he gets that renewal or she gets that renewal document.
Have you been thinking about buying your first rental property for some time, or do you already own a bunch of properties? Well, fellow investors, you found the right location to listen and learn from others' successes. Welcome to The Very Real Estate Effect with your host, Axel Monsang.
Hello, and welcome back to the Very Real Estate Effect podcast, a show dedicated to real estate investing right here in Quebec. And today it's an honor to have Cory Friedman back on the show. You may remember him from a couple months ago, maybe 2-3 months ago. Welcome back, man.
Appreciate it. Really happy to be back.
So you are the founder of Compass. It's a property management software that you've launched recently that's already getting quite successful. We'll get into it. Before we do, two things. Thank you, all our listeners, as usual. And I'm only going to ask you one thing, is that when I look at the amount of listens versus subscribers, there's still a discrepancy. If you frequently listen to the show, just press the little button on the top right corner and just subscribe. It'll really help us reach more people like yourself. So before we get into it, I'm very happy to announce that Cory and the Compass platform has decided to join and to collaborate with the podcast to support us and to be able to put more content out there. And I look forward to the conversations every time because you have so much experience in property management and it always raises a lot of questions. It's from the audience.
You know, I started Compass, or I brought Compass to the public because I wanted to help other property managers, landlords, property owners with a lot of the same problems that everyone is facing and answering a lot of the questions. And when I started listening to your podcast, I felt you were coming from a very similar place where, hey, you wanted to provide insight. You wanted to provide answers to these frequently asked questions by owners that whether you had 1 door, 10 doors, or 100 or 1,000 doors, right? We're all scratching our head over the same issue. So naturally, it's an exciting partnership for me to be involved with. And at the end of the day, we're trying to support the same group of people, which
Absolutely.
is property owners, landlords, property managers, and really anybody who is renting or managing rentals here in Quebec.
And, you know, to set your background a little bit more, like you've started the Compass platform coming from a property management company where you guys manage thousands of doors from your own portfolio and for other owners. And so you've been around a few blocks a few times. You've gone through these processes. And for today, like we're in April, it's renewal season.
'Tis the season.
And so I bet you're busy right now.
Yes. Well, anybody who is in rentals in Quebec knows that it is all about the road to July 1st, right? We live in a very funny market where, you know, the majority of leases are signed within a 3-month period being, May to June, July. You have some September too, but it's really all about the ramp up to this very short and intense leasing season. And you can't have leases without renewals.
Yeah.
And we live in Quebec where the TAL, the Tribunal Administratif Logement, provides a very interesting and unique framework for how, when, what, why, and where to send and deliver renewals.
Yes.
Right? So let's dive in.
Absolutely. It's very regimented. And so maybe like, to set the stage again, like, okay, at least ending and finishing on July 1st, you need to renew 3 months before. So this was end of March. So what are the steps that you guys go through?
So before you talk about the steps, we got to talk about what type of lease is it? Meaning, is the lease greater or equal to 12 months or more, or less than 12 months? Because that will really start your flow, right? So let's assume that you have a lease that is at least 12 months of length. Now you have what's called a renewal delivery window.
Mm-hmm.
So you can deliver this renewal between 6 months to 3 months prior to the lease expiry. So you're July 1st, you're looking at, hey, we can deliver this between February and April, right? Now, the most important part about your renewal is obviously going to be the increase amount, right?
Yes.
And we live, like I said, I'm always going to say we live in Quebec. And what that means is that Quebec forces operators like no other state or province here in North America to follow a lot of rules, regulations. And here we're talking about rent control, right? You have certain guidelines of how much you can increase the rent on a tenant. Now, this will differ if you have new construction versus old construction, but the crux of it, or the basis of it, is you need to determine your increase based on the actual operating expenses of the building. So your property taxes, your insurance, your services, repairs and maintenance, any other professional services that you're doing at the building. And it's really a comparison between the previous year and the current year, right? So I'm sure a lot of your listeners know that whether they're on Corpic or whether they're on the TAL website, they have a calculator tool where they can input their expenses and it can generate, that percentage increase, right? So that's the first step that you need to do, and you need to generate those increases. So for me, when I'm looking at this process, and I'm always thinking the July 1st leases, my steps really start when we get that property tax bill in January. Right? Because that's the biggest expense that you're going to incur, aside from your mortgage, obviously, which has no impact on your renewals. But once you get those property taxes, you should be equipped to populate those calculation sheets with the new rates for the year, get your percentage increase, and start actually creating, or if you have a system, to auto-populate your renewal documents for your leases.
And it's interesting that you described that, because yes, it's one thing to get the file from either, as you said, like Corpic or the TAL. What takes more time in a lot of cases is collect all the relevant numbers, and hence why having a really good, accurate, timely accounting is important. More and more reasons of, I understand where you're coming from. When you manage dozens, if not hundreds of buildings, let alone units, you can't start to chase number by number, address by address. So I understand where you're coming from just for the renewal process of the lease.
The renewal process is it has such a strong correlation to your bookkeeping and accounting practices throughout the year, right? Think of it like you're back in university and you have two options. You could go attend every class, do the assignments, read the book as the year goes by. And by the time it's the final exam, you're ready. You've studied
all year long.
Right? Or you could take the other approach, which most people do with bookkeeping, is I'm just going to do the bare minimum throughout the year. And when it comes to the final exam, I'm going to cram. And what ends up happening is the person who crams is rarely going to outperform the person who has a consistent process throughout the year. Right? So that's the best analogy I could have for,
that's a really good one,
for taking the importance of bookkeeping throughout the year with respect to the renewals.
Okay, so then collecting the numbers, that's where it starts with the with the steps, filling up the calculator. It's provided with certain percentages per category by the TAL. What are the timelines like?
So then once we have the numbers, we've created the document. Now it's all about the proof of delivery, the preuve de livraison, because we actually have to deliver this document, this renewal document, to our tenants. And this can be done manually or digitally. And I put an asterisk next to digitally because it can only be done digitally if your tenant consents to receiving the communication digitally, right? So, a lot of people, they say, I'm going to email the tenant, but if they haven't formally consented to receiving digital communication about their lease, technically speaking, the tenant can ignore your email, and it's as if your renewal never got delivered in the eyes of the TAL. So when it comes to delivery, we want to try and get that consent from tenants, and this can be done, through an email where they respond to the email that they consent. Typically what people do is they actually include this in the annex of their lease itself. So, as a process to ensure. And obviously there are certain softwares, I may know one or two, aka Compass, that can help you track and get these consents to digitally deliver your renewal
with a proof of
with that preuve de livraison.
And a proof of open.
Exactly. And you'll see, like, a lot of people ask me, like, oh, does the TAL accept that? Does the TAL accept that? And yes, the TAL does accept the digital delivery as long as there is the backup and evidence of the consent, and also the audit trail that in fact was delivered. And it in fact was opened or sent, right? So a lot of times what people are doing is they're including the content or the body of the renewal in that email, so that the open read receipt of that email acts as the preuve de livraison.
Very good. Makes sense. So then, so it needs to be sent at the minimum 3 months before the end of the lease?
So no earlier than 6 months before and no later than 3 months before.
Okay, so for a lease in July, it's January to end of March.
You got it. You got it, right? And once you get that proof of delivery, we have a new timeline that
Yeah.
starts, and that's that 30-day notice window, right? We have this concept in Quebec called tacit lease renewal, right? And what this means is that you've proved the delivery of your renewal, and if your tenant does not formally respond to you within 30 days, they auto accept.
Mhm.
It's like, you ever get like that email from one of your subscriptions that you probably forgot about and said, you're going to auto renew unless you go and cancel, clicking this very,
Yeah.
very small link in the fine print.
Yeah, we all made that mistake.
So this is the tacit renewal, right? So it's a lot of dates, it's a lot of administration, it's a lot of orchestration and follow-up, because there are multiple steps, right? And in my mind, it's like, you need to assign an increase. You need to print out a document or digitally manufacture a document. You need to deliver that document. You need to get the proof of delivery. And then you have a 30-day window where you need to track the pending renewal until its completion.
Okay. So then at the end of that 30-day window, they must have given you an answer, yes, no, I accept, I refuse. We all want them to accept. If they refuse, then what?
So there's two types of refuses, right? It's nothing's easy. Nothing's easy. So they can accept the increase. They can say, I don't accept the increase and I'm going to move out. And door number 3, which is landlord's least favorite door, is I refuse your increase, but I want to stay.
Okay.
And I want to go to the TAL for fixation of rent and let the courts decide what the new renewal rate will be for my unit.
Yeah.
Right. And so this opens up a whole new administrative process for landlords and property owners, because they now have to jump through hoops to make sure that they're crossing every T and dotting every I as far as the TAL's procedure for opening up a file, serving the file, documenting the file, uploading the documents, getting the right authorizations, going to a hearing, providing the documents. You know, I have a funny saying that I always say. It's like, when it comes to the TAL, the TAL, you want to CYA, right? You want to cover your fill in the blank, right? Cover your butt. Exactly. So you want to make sure that all your T's are crossed, all your I's are dotted. And it really starts with your backup, which validates your increase. But more importantly, it's the documentation that you do from the moment you open the file to the moment you go to the hearing, et cetera, because there's a lot of micro steps in between.
I had this conversation with an investor yesterday. She has a court date mid-April, and I told her, like, you have a lot on that hearing. Make sure you're well prepared and yet you have everything in the proper number of copies and stuff. And she looked at me, she's like, what do you mean? I need to bring more than one copy? I'm like, oh yeah, it's a minimum of 3. And I was like, look, you have a lot at stake. I'd hate for your case to be thrown out on a technicality, even though you're due this increase. Make sure you get properly prepared. I even suggested, like, take an hour with a lawyer just to make sure. And oh yeah, okay, I recommended her someone. Hopefully she goes through with it. But having been through it myself, I do realize the importance of, as you said, like, having every T crossed off, because there's nothing more frustrating than getting there. You do all the work. You've waited 3 months and it's like, oh, you didn't bring the proper number of copies for us to look at for the next 7 minutes.
Yeah. And and the way that the courts are structured, that is a reason enough for you to actually lose the case or misheard or have to delay another several months to be heard. Right. So it kind of brings me to, like, this discussion, and I'm always thinking in terms of cost benefit, right? As most real estate owners are, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to really understand the cost benefit of this exercise, right? Because when you have 1 unit, 10 units, 100 units, your situation is going to be different, but you really have to look at each renewal case and say, well, can I negotiate here with the tenant? Can we avoid having to jump through hoops and spend our time, our energy, our focus on making sure we do this process right, and actually delaying, several months of uncertainty, of question, of time and headaches, right? So, if you're asking for a $50 increase, can you do $40 and make it deal? Can you do $35? At what point does, the delta in the rent that you would get versus are going to get, is that going to
is worth
your time and energy to go through the TAL? And who's to say that your bookkeeping is up to snuff for you to even validate that increase, right? So there's a lot of factors in play where maybe, just maybe, you want to try to avoid the TAL through what we call, negotiation.
A good old negotiation, and just sit down and be like, look, if you want to go down that route, we can. It's going to take time for both you and I. And one thing I always share with the tenants is, look, if you want to go down that route, it's your choice. I don't particularly want to. However, if we go there, you have to realize that your name is also going to be in that database. And then every time you're going to be looking for a dwelling, a potential landlord can look in the system, find you in there. Whether you were right or wrong doesn't really matter, is the fact that you were there. So just think about it, because we're arguing for $7 a month. Is that worth it? And I've seen people be like, yeah, you know what? Okay, fine, I'll accept. Forget it. It was 35. I wanted 25. Thank you. Goodbye. And I'm sure you've been in this situation too, as you said, of the negotiation of like, is it worth everybody's time?
100%. There's a human element to this, right?
Yeah,
and
always
I'll even take it even further back, that this human element doesn't start when you deliver the renewal. It starts when they first move into your apartment. And you see there's a stigma when it comes to the tenant-landlord relationship that is a little bit negative, a little bit like combative, right? Because, everyone feels like they're not living up to their side of the responsibility, right? Tenants need to pay their rent on time. They need to treat the apartment with respect. They need to treat the other residents, peaceful enjoyment and stuff. And on the flip side, tenants expect landlords to provide service, to provide good unit, whether the amenities that are displayed are actually functioning, et cetera, and responsiveness.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't manage that relationship throughout the term of the lease, you're going to almost guarantee that the tenant is going to be a little bit vengeful when he gets that renewal or she gets that renewal document. Yeah. And they're not going to be as open to maybe make a negotiation that's going to save you dollars and time, as opposed to saying, you know what, this is now the tenant's opportunity to stick it to the landlord. So it's an interesting dynamic here that you want to balance, right? You want to balance, what is reasonable, what is cost effective, but also how to manage these relationships.
It's interesting that you mentioned like, oh, that's the one time of the year where sometimes they feel like they can get back at the landlord. We've all been in situations where everything's going well. You go for the renewal and, oh, by the way, this door doesn't close properly and this hasn't been addressed. And this, and it's like, well, how long has it been? Oh, the doors has been 3 months. And you're just telling me now? How come? Well, I don't want to sign until you fix the door. It's like, well, I mean, how do you handle that? Because I know how I handle it, but I want to hear from a pro.
It's all about leverage, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about when do you have the moments of leverage. So, listen, you have tenants of all types that are going to game the system a little bit better than others.
Yeah.
And there's no one way to do it, right? Obviously, when you have more scale, we centralize these types of operations in terms of tenant communications, maintenance requests, service requests, and stuff like that. So it's less likely. But when you're a smaller landlord and it's really you're dealing with phone calls or emails or whatnot, tenants often feel that their requests go unheard or unanswered. And so they accumulate a bundle and they wait for the moment where they have leverage. Yeah. So I hear you. It makes sense. It's
well, I always try to dissociate and say, look, thank you for letting me know. I mean, I'm sorry to hear the door's been 3 months. I wish you would have told me 2.5 months ago.
Yeah.
I always dissociate and say we have to treat those things separately. We're at the period of the cycle where we renew the lease. We look at the operating expenses and what it means for you and I. On the maintenance, that's separate. I'm glad you told us. Did you send it in writing? Did you send an email? No, you didn't. Okay, well then, if you don't let me know, I can't fix it.
Right. You're not a mind reader. Also, your landlords are not mind readers.
Well, I can only read no one's mind other than mine.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
No, so I try to dissociate the two and go from there. So what I hear is that you will negotiate to avoid going to the towel for, I don't want to say pitiless reasons, but to find a happy medium
within reason, right? Yeah. You have parameters that you want to follow. You have targets that you want to hit in your revenues, and you want to be able to have tenants that accept. You have certain units where you have no room for negotiation because you're below market and you have the backup to support it. But yeah, you want to be open. It's really something that at scale is hard to do because there's so many unique case by case situations.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, we can also, this would be kind of the end of a cycle. Okay, tenant has agreed. We're renewing for this year. The rent is going to go from X amount to X amount starting on July 1st. Now, those who decide to leave, you will end up with some empty units.
Yeah.
And you start a whole new process again, right?
Yeah. So Renewals go into leasing,
Yeah.
right? Your inventory, your future available inventory is going to be determined based on your renewal results, right? Who's moving out? What's your turnover? And what's the important part is to start this process earlier so you can maximize the amount of time you have to re-rent the unit with as little downtime as possible.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to leasing, right? There's 3 famous words that are all around the industry, and it's lead to lease. Everything is all about lead to lease. This means there is a very unique process now where you need to generate leads, right? Inquiries, people that are interested in your apartments. You need to turn those leads into tours or visits or in-persons or virtuals. You need to turn those visits into rental applications, and you need to turn those rental applications into leases, But really today I'm more interested in talking about that first step is generating leads, because to me, that is a very interesting part of the business that is, since I've been involved, has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, well, it evolves so much in terms of consumer preferences and where people look for this information, where to find apartments. And before we go into that, I'm just thinking in our portfolio, I feel like this year, might be the year where we have the most turnover. And we've had properties that have been very stable, and all of a sudden, no, we have 3 units that are turning, whereas maybe it was 1. And, in terms of the market, are you seeing the same thing right now?
Yes, we are. And the main reason is that 5.9% average increase that the TAL has calculated or based on, the average increase across the city. But increases are higher than they have been in the past. And it's really, tenants are looking at that and saying, well, maybe it's time that I move or that I look for a different area to live in or a different situation. Also depends your product, right? The older, cheaper,
and the price point.
And the price point. The price point is really going to impact your turnover rate. But for sure, you're seeing it with the increase, also with the delivery of new units. I think this year or 2024, CMHC posted that 32,000 new units delivered, which is a 50% increase year over year. So you have more units, and these units are offering, one time only extra big promotions that people are kind of hopping year by year over to try and get the best deals.
I've seen a building that offered 4-month free.
Yeah. Listen, we talked about it. We talked about it previously when we went into deep dive in the new construction, but that's part of the game, right? So there's a multitude of factors that lead to the higher turnover. But back really to the generating leads, it's like when I look back when I started in this business, it's pretty simple. You had an Alloué sign on the building, right? And it had a phone
rent
number.
by owner.
That's it. And you had somebody who answered the phones, and
you came to visit on Saturday.
You went to the visits. You had the janitors or supers or concierge do the visits. You had a stack of paper leases ready to go at the building. And you executed, right? That slowly evolved, or pretty quickly evolved over the last decade, right? Like, it moved to the Kijijis and Craiglists of the world, right? And then that moved to like the social medias, the Facebook Marketplace, the Facebook groups, right? Appartement à louer Montreal, Apartments for Rent Montreal. There's a lot of Facebook groups where there's a lot of action. And then there was the rise of, what I call the ILS. The ILS is the internet listing site, right? The Zumper, the Padmapper, the Kangaloo, the rentals.ca, the RentSync, right? So these listing sites, like think of it like the Expedia or Trivago for apartment rentals, right? So it kind of created this environment where the digital presence that you had for your listing and for your lead gen became more and more important, but more and more scattered across different avenues.
Because and when you say scattered is because the same apartment will be listed on 4 different systems. Yeah,
right. So you now, like, if you want to maximize the amount of leads that you could generate, you can't just do one avenue. You have to be like this multi-pronged advertising or marketing campaign where, you have a website, you're posting on the website. You have a Facebook account, you're posting it on Facebook Marketplace and in the Facebook groups. And then you're posting it on Kijiji, and then you're turning the listing on Zumper and Kangaloo and all these different things, which for the smaller landlord is overwhelming
Yeah.
and very expensive.
And time consuming.
Oh, yes.
You take one listing. I mean, we got much better, like all the pictures, all the unit descriptions, and it's a copy paste. But like at the beginning, it takes a bit of juice to get all that going, especially when you say, oh, I got to post it on 3 platforms. Now, luckily, most will keep the listing and you can activate, deactivate, which is a game changer.
Yeah.
But still.
Yeah, no, it really, the time, the effort, the technical prowess, the follow-up of it, right? Of actually getting these inquiries and being caught on them, has created kind of a new service provider in the market that I've seen in the last like 3-4 years, right? And this is the rental agents. Yeah. Right. You
mean a rental broker?
Yeah. So not even a broker, right? There's this emerging in Quebec and in other markets as well, where there are companies now that understand marketing and lead gen and renting for apartments is becoming, a more tech savvy game and more multifaceted game. So instead of you having to manage 5 different listing sites and 5 different logins and admins and whatnot, let me find a company. They'll handle it all, and I'll pay them 1 month's rent. And they're going to find you qualified tenants. They're going to screen them. They're going to put together the documents, collect the first month rent and everything. Right. Okay. So
they'll go to the lease signed and the person move in. It's not just lead gen.
No.
And then the owner needs still to do the paperwork.
No. Okay. Yeah. They'll do the full one-stop shop. Right. Okay. And it kind of, the creation of this market and the growth of this market is mainly because you have other things to do as a
time
property
consuming
manager, and the time that it takes to manage this process now is greater than the value of 1 month rent. Believe that, right? Yeah. So it's, and there are people who do less than 1 month, but it kind of just is a testament to how the market is changing in terms of the time you need to invest into reaching the consumers and their new behavior, right? And don't even get me started about what's coming into the future, right? Because all the things that you knew about Kangaloo and all these other sites and RentSync and like that's all changing with AI, right? The way that people are searching online is now changing. They're saying that
how so?
How so? 1 in 5 people now are relying on ChatGPT or other language learning models as opposed to doing traditional Google search.
Yeah.
So all of the websites that you've now invested in that are embedded into people searching on Google are no longer as relevant or as impactful or as effective because people are going now to LLMs and they're asking these language learning models, hey, I want to live in this neighborhood with these specs. Like, can you recommend where I should go? Oh, wow. And how it's generating those responses is much different than the traditional ways these sites are leveraging SEO and Google AdWords and other things like that.
That's a very good point. And how all that technology is impacting every single industry, and the real estate. And in this case, as you said, the leasing process is really interesting.
Yeah, like, we kind of more focused on the leads and talking like there's much more that goes in, but I find that is the one area where technology is having the greatest impact in terms of changing of consumer behavior, changing of what you need to do as a property owner or as a property manager or as a rental agent to maximize the number of leads you could get, but also the best conversion of leads to lease or leads to application, because
the whole process,
right? Like it's great. I could get 1,000 inquiries, but if I only turn 1,000 inquiries into one lease and I'm paying per inquiry, that's a very dangerous game.
The mouth of the funnel, how big the pipe is, and what end up on the other side, whether you have 1 unit to fill, 3 units to fill, or 25, you need to have the appropriate system. What I find really interesting is that given your experience managing thousands of units and having developed this wonderful platform, you are really at the core of this. And thank you for sharing, the consumer behavior evolution, where now people go on ChatGPT to say, I want to live in Hochelaga for $1,200 a month with 2 bedrooms and a nice view. Because that does really change the algorithm and how we as the supply need to adapt to that.
Yes. And, we as the supplier are typically later to the party in adapting than the consumers themselves, right? It's usually the change in consumer behavior that will drive the supply to actually change
Yeah.
the way that they operate. But very, very interesting to follow over the next, I'd say, 18 to 24 months, as really these ChatGPTs, these Perplexities, these Claudes, these different LLMs and machine learning models, that they're just becoming more and more popular, more and more accessible. And like consumers, like how many people go on their phone now and just talk to ChatGPT? Like it's their iMessage, right? Like it's very, very interesting time we're in.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, Cory. It's a real pleasure. I look forward already to having you back shortly.
Yes.
So we can continue this conversation.
Yeah. No, I think that we should talk about, okay, you get all these leads. What should we do with them?
What do we do? Okay, so next time let's do that.
Absolutely.
Okay,
I
sounds
think that's
good.
Great.
And for Compass, if listeners are interested, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Oh, yeah. So 2 best ways to get in touch, obviously through our website, www.compasspm.com. That's KOMPASPM.com. Otherwise, come find me on LinkedIn. I'm always posting about what we're doing, what's happening in the market in terms of property management, accounting, technology, Montreal focused, Canada focused. So those are really the 2 best ways to come and chat.
Wonderful. Well, they'll reach out to you there. And for everybody who's listening, as usual, keep educated, research your market, make some offers. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next week. Ciao.